Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Buy Round Interview Show. Now we have a very special guest for our watchers and listeners today. We've got a person that's coming in to talk about the all-important mind and psychology of high-performing teams and athletes. It's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Dr. Scott Goldman, who is a high-performance and clinical psychologist who currently works as head of psychology for the Golden State Warriors in the NBA, also works closely with the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Cubs, amongst multiple sporting organizations as well, is the founder of the AIQ tool, which helps athletes and their coaches provide tailor-made programs to help them reach their peak performance. It has been used by over 17,000 athletes across the globe. That is a big introduction.
Yeah, that was a mouthful.
It sure was. Dr. Goldman, how are you? Recently landed in Sydney. Also, what brings you to this fine city?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking. I'm doing well. I'm a little sleep deprived, which makes this a really interesting interview. We'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to the conversation. What brings me to Sydney? An opportunity to talk with you. An opportunity to talk with some of the people that are managing the AIQ with all the different teams and leagues that we're doing here. So it was just one of those things where it was overdue. So I'm here with my partner, Jim Bowman, and then one of our teammates, Adam Billing, who's been an absolute rock star when it comes to introducing the AIQ to the teams, the coaches, the players around Australia. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to unpacking that all-important mind and psychology aspect of sport. I introduced you there. What's your elevator pitch? How do you draw people in? You meet someone in the elevator, what do you say to them?
About me or about the AIQ?
Well, let's do both.
Okay, sometimes it's easier to talk about something else other than me. I think in an elevator, what I normally do actually is I try to listen and learn. I'm more of a curious questioner than I am an answer provider. But my elevator pitch would go something like this. For me, I think human beings are complicated. I think human interactions are a wonderful complexity of complication. And psychology is just about understanding that. So I find for the last 27 years, what I've done in organizations is I've tried to listen and provide almost like a curator of knowledge, just provide contextual wisdom about the psychology or the interaction and understanding of human behavior, especially in the most elite and highest performance of settings, whether they're gold medal winners or, trying to win a world championship, that kind of stuff. With the AIQ, the way I would try to elevator pitch that is I would say, we see a comprehensive athletic profile consisting of 4 domains. So the first one is physical, right? Are they big? Are they strong? Are they fast? Second one is about experience and knowledge. What kind of system did they play growing up? Have they always been an elite sport? Are they somebody that was kind of a raw talent? Like right now in North America, there's a lot of teams that are investing time and interest with African athletes. And what's really interesting is they're coming into our leagues with only 3-4 years of experience in the sport, but they're so physically gifted. There's this opportunity kind of thing. So that would be that second bucket is the experience. The third bucket is the personality one, which is all about are they glue guys in the locker room or are they toxic? And then the fourth bucket is intelligence. How do they go about solving the unsolvable puzzle? I mean, sports is such an element of chaos, which is, I think, why we like it, right? I mean, you just can't predict this stuff. You just don't know what's going to happen. And I think how people go about working that Rubik's Cube is a real asset to that profile. So the AIQ really focuses on measuring the most relevant sport-specific related intelligence.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Something.
Hopefully, it's a tall building. That was a long elevator pitch. Sorry, thanks for hanging with me.
You're right. It's interesting that the recruitment of athletes and how small the globe has become.
Yeah.
I wonder if we'll ever see Usain Bolt's 100-meter record beaten. That world record will ever be beaten, because I know a lot of talent scouts in the US go to Jamaica, scout on pure speed, offer these young athletes a better path that doesn't include 100-meter running. It's through the collegiate college system usually, because it's speed is a raw talent. It arguably can't be taught, although you can fine tune it. But if you go from 100, if you're a young athlete, 100-meter sprinter, like, what are your chances of making it? And it's not as exciting or sexy or financially rewarding as going into that free college education. So it just going off track a little bit. I wonder if Bolt's record will ever be beaten because of that new recruitment strategy over in the States.
Right. And I think what you're saying is, are these guys and gals going to be pulled into other sports? You know, some of these physically gifted individuals who might have concentrated in Jamaica on just running are now getting pulled into a sport that might have a little bit more monetary pursuits. That's a really interesting concept. You know, no one's ever really asked me that question before. That's a good one. This is going to be a fun interview. So I think here's an interesting, hopefully an interesting to your audience answer. One of the old adages in basketball is you can't coach height. However, if you look at, and it makes sense, right? Because the taller you are, the more likely you are to grab rebounds.
Well, I think it's something like if you know somebody who's over 7 foot tall, they have a 50% chance of playing in the NBA.
Yeah, it's not quite that high. I think it's 1 in 10.
One in 10 of over. Yeah.
But astronomically high. Like, if you know a 7-footer, and I don't know, I can't convert the metric system. I'm sorry, maybe 3 meters. I don't know.
Yeah.
My apologies as a dumb American. But like, if you know a 7-footer, there's a really good chance they're going to be in the NBA. But here's what's fascinating. Let's say all you needed was rebounding. Okay, you just need rebounding. Your team's complete, but you just need rebounding. There is a lot of evidence, and it makes logical sense, that the taller you are, the more likely you are to grab rebounds. Until you get to about 6'8", 6 feet 8 inches. Once you go beyond that height, it doesn't matter how much taller you are. So the competitive advantage for rebounding with height is negated once you're beyond 6'8". So to go to your point, 7-footers can sometimes be overvalued because of their height, but statistically speaking, it doesn't benefit them. So I bring this up because, as you're pointing out, you're going like, hey, will Usain Bolt's record ever be broken? I think it will, because records break all the time. But I'm not so sure it's because some of these unbelievably gifted athletes are going to migrate to more monetarily driven sport. I think it has more to do with, again, once we're all 6'8", how do we figure out competitive advantages for rebounding, or how do we get bigger, stronger, faster? I think it's going to be a part of other domains. So it's going to be things like focusing on their intelligence, like what is their AIQ profile? Or it'll be like, you know, how much do they really want it? You know, is that personality profile? Like, are they going to be competitive, or are they going to wake up when everybody else sleeps in, kind of thing? And so I think we will always find athletes, especially as the margins of those physical abilities get more and more narrow.
Well, I think with an A to B event like the 100-meter dash, it's all on genetic potential, which can only, I don't know how much the mind can contribute to that A to B event. Obviously, there would be a psychological component. Other than advancements in technology, footwear, which, I don't know, you could make a case that that's not actual sprinting. So some of the marathon record breakers now, it's all because of the shoe and the shoe design. So I wonder if anybody with the genetic potential to break Usain Bolt's 100-meter dash record would be plucked out of the Jamaican sprinting athletics carnivals and put into the American collegiate system, and it would just be a simple, if you're 13, 14 and you've got looking like you've got the genetic potential to break that, a college is going to offer you a substantial figure to come and join their team, look after their family, and the 100-meter dash is forgotten about, and that's somebody else's issue.
Or that player gets punched in the mouth on the first day of football and says, I'm out. I'm going back to Jamaica and just running because I don't get tackled on that 100. So to your point, there's an American journalist, David Epstein. I want to make sure.
I know
brilliant.
of him. Yeah,
right? Brilliant work. His TED Talk is fantastic. And he talks a lot about that people aren't really getting, well, he makes 2 points, right? are we getting bigger, stronger, faster? He says, we're becoming more amorphous, like we're mutating as human. Like, Michael Phelps, the swimmer, has this just unique body, or the Kenyan runner that he kind of highlights, is all legs, that kind of stuff. But then he talks about, when Jesse Owens ran, he ran on crushed ash.
Yeah.
And now we have all this kind of like spongy particle board that gives a lot of force back. So, but it is a rich tapestry. I mean, that's why we love sports, right? And so I think some of it will be technology. I think some of it will be genetic gifts and mutations that will make somebody out there with just the right kind of like muscle fiber and all of that stuff. I think it will be broken. I guess that's the sort of like, we're the only species on this planet to go to the moon. Like, we've done some cool things as human beings, and I do think the best is yet to come.
Okay, well, that's interesting. We'll unpack how that potential can be reached. A team or an organization acquires your services.
Okay.
What happens next?
Well, for me as a sports psychologist, when I'm onboarded, I find, because of my skill set and training, I can be of service to the players directly. I can be of service to the coaches. I can also be of service to the front office and to ownership. So onboarding and offboarding, if I were to just start with it, right? Getting the right people on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus, that's step one. Then it really...
How much of a process is that, and how do you conclude who you want on the bus and who you want off it?
Yeah, so from a player perspective, going back to the 4 domains, I try to have ownership in the 2, the psychological and the intelligence, right? So I use the AIQ to help profile how they see the game and process the game. And then from a personality standpoint, I do construct a psychological profile that's like, hey, I think this guy's a really good match for the way our coaches coach, or, this person might benefit from this type or this style of a locker room. If you get the person right, you get the player right. So I try to hold ownership in that on the onboarding. From coaches, the onboarding is, again, goodness of fit. I think what's really interesting, just to go on a slight tangent, if that's okay, is we often really focus on players or a person, whether it's the coach or the player, right? But what we really want is their production. So what happens is like, you say, oh, and I'll forgive me, and to your audience, please forgive me, because I'm probably going to use more North American references, right? But like when we talk about a guy like Kevin Durant, for example, in basketball, or Jalen Hurts in the NFL, what people want when they trade for him or when they get him is his production, not him. And I think production is really a formula that's based off of the person and the environment. So what we forget is when that person was really successful, like Jalen Hurts is really successful for the Philadelphia Eagles right now and has been for the last couple of years. If the Denver Broncos trade for him, they think they're getting all of his production, but his production in Philadelphia comes from his teammates, it comes from his coaches, it comes from the philosophy of the team and the plays that they call. So it's that kind of rich tapestry that I think is the really cool puzzle to solve. Is this person going to be good for us? And actually, like one of the things, a phrase that I've used multiple times with some of the teams I've worked with is I said, I think we have to be comfortable letting a player be good for someone else if we know they can't be great for us. So with some of the organizations I've worked on, we've passed on players that the media will crush us for, and the front office gets like, Scott, I'm like, it's almost like Braveheart. I'm like, hold, just hold. And then sure enough, like 2-3 years later, it kind of pans out where we made the right decision for our organization. And we've had more success because of that good fit philosophy rather than just getting the best available.
How do you establish the trust of the organization? Because
great question.
If I'm an experienced coach, near experienced player, experienced owner, I've got this guy coming in who's telling me like, this, we've got to get rid of this guy, and then he goes on to be successful or good at another organization.
Yeah.
Like,
that can be an absolute coach killing moment, right? Like the person you let go of and the fan base turns on you. I mean, these are big time decisions. The thing that I am so grateful and honored to have done for the last 20 some odd years is to be a part of some really amazing decisions. And it's really interesting because I think about my colleagues that also work in this space and how many of them have these very healthy egos. So they'll take credit for things that I'm not so sure any of us in this profession deserve to take credit for. So I just want to be real clear as we go down this path. It's not me. Like, I'm not the person saying, oh, don't take this player or you got to take that player. It's really about helping people feel confident and well-informed about the decisions that they're making. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be the GM who's going to be ridiculed in the media. It's not going to be me. But I have had some very vulnerable conversations with GMs or head coaches that go like, what do I do here? Like, this is a hard puzzle to solve because I know this will win the off season. And I also know this will not help us win during season. So how do I weather that? Or how do we feel confident? So I think my contribution is to try to sit in that space and create an environment where they can process and understand and come to a conclusion that can be really powerful.
So just with that, I often look at right message, wrong messenger.
Yeah, that can happen a lot.
So you can have a nugget of gold, but if you've not got the right sales pitch, like it's not going to be undertaken by the playing group. So how much you're acquired to a new organization, that first meeting, you walk in the room, you've got a bunch of players here, you're going to, I'm assuming you're going to implement or trying to implement some new strategies, even taking this, I guess, quote unquote test for you to try and figure out who I am as an athlete. Like, you think you're going to figure me out with this test? Okay. It's actually going to help the performance.
Yes.
You believe. So how do you make sure that the message is not undertaken and understood and then implemented by the players? Because I'm thinking, I look at the game now and I see before teams go out, they stand in a huddle and they do this breath work.
Right.
Or after they've scored, they'll come together and they'll do breath work.
Yeah.
Now, that's the right thing to do. And towards the back end of my career, we did some breath work. But at the start of my career, with the group that I played with, if somebody had come in and told us we're going to do our breathing, they would have been laughed out of the building.
No doubt. 100% agree. So let's unpack. First of all, what a sophisticated question. I mean, like there is a lot to unpack. So let's start with the trust element.
Yeah.
Because I think without trust, you got nothing, right? In my humble opinion, trust is built off of 3 pillars. One is authenticity. I think you got to be true who you are. So one of the things that I try to do is I try to be honest with people. I try to be, real. I don't name drop. I don't go, oh, well, this is what I said to so-and-so with the previous team I worked for. Because I think people see through that, or they'll call that player and be like, hey, did Scott really have this impact? And they might say yes, they might say no. I mean, that kind of stuff. So I try to be authentic. And I find for me, one of the ways of being authentic is to kind of slow down. I think in this kind of elite performance space, sometimes people can get really anxious and excited and they just want to like resume dump. Let me tell you all this stuff I've done, or let me tell you how smart I am. So what I do is I try to really listen. I try to listen deeply. One of my friends gave me that as an ultimate compliment. He goes, you really listen deeply. So I come from an authentic place of genuine curiosity. Like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. I would kind of want to know, like, where are you from and what's comfort food? Like, everybody's got comfort food, right? Like, what's comfort food for you? So first I try to understand and listen. Authenticity. Second pillar is about wisdom. It's about actually not talking out of your backside. I have 2 PhDs. One's in clinical psychology, one's in school psychology. And the school psychology one's really great because of the learning theory and understanding interaction and all of that. I think coaches are teachers. I think players are learners, right? So being empirically validated, having best practices, so you're not just talking out of something or using some modern pop psychology, like that breath work you're talking about. I've seen people kind of sell it in a way that has the room laughing. And then I've seen people kind of explain it in a way that really comes from good science. Like, when you take a good deep diaphragmatic breath, that oxygen level causes a sense of calm, like all of that kind of science. So the second pillar is about coming from a place of knowledge and training. And then the third bucket, if you look at the literature, talk about coming from knowledge and training, the third bucket actually talks about empathy, which is, like understanding someone. So the way I like to categorize it, sympathy is where you feel sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. Empathy is like, I too know what it feels like to lose somebody that I cared about. But the third bucket is compassion. So people often will use sympathy, empathy, and compassion interchangeably. And the literature talks about empathy as being the third domain of trust building. I actually have replaced it personally with compassion. And compassion is, instead of saying, hey, I know what it feels like, or I understand, you go, I don't have to understand. I don't know what it feels like, but how can I help? What can I do to be supportive? And so if you're authentic and you have a skill set and a real desire to want to help, I think trust is generally built. So to your point, you look at me and you're like, this guy's a slapdick. I mean, did this guy even play sports growing up? I mean, I get what I look like, and I can't change that look. So when I walk in, I try to come with a little bit of grace, a little bit of humility, and I engage in authentic, genuine interaction. When there's an opportunity, I try to teach and be a resource with some real support. And I try to really engage with a level of compassion that says, like, the quest you're going on, I think, is really amazing, which it is. What can I do to help? And if that means, grabbing some water, I'll go grab, I'll mop a floor. I'll be at a team practice I'll mop a floor. I mean, if it helps us, if it helps make the boat row faster. So that's the trust part of that. Now comes back to like the conviction. I think when it comes to athletes, a third are going to do everything, even the stuff that kind of contradicts the other stuff. Like a third are like, I'll have boiled chicken and I'll sleep in hyperbaric chambers and I'll do all of it. And then you got a third that do nothing. Like they're eating McDonald's. Sorry, McDonald's. I'm sure you've got a high nutrition quality. Maybe, I don't know. We don't have to go there. I don't want your podcast to get sued. So, a fast food restaurant. And they get no sleep. They're out womanizing. And then they go and score all kinds of points and everything. And then there's a third that are kind of like curious. Let me experiment or let me kind of dabble with this. And so I just try to focus on going to those, like you don't plant seeds in parking lots, right? So I try to go and engage with people who are kind of curious and resourceful. I try to be cautious to those that buy into everything because they can be really susceptible to the con man. Sorry, that was a lot, but your question was awesome.
Where'd you spend most of your time? Because sporting organizations, you've got those three different types of people rather. I've looked at things like the Pareto distribution, things like Price's law, and who can impact, and the amount of people that impact results. Everybody talks about equity and inclusion, and all these sort of buzzwords in and around working environments. But if you look at the data, it will show that the Pareto distribution and Price's law actually, they exist.
Yes.
And it's true. And there's evidence to suggest that. So I think the Pareto distribution is 80% of the output is performed by 20% of the people.
That's
and
right.
Price's law is the square root of the number of people produce 50% of the output. I'm close.
Yeah, you're scratching on the right door.
So for you as a psychologist that is trying to shape an environment, do you apply those principles or laws to your work?
Yes. Like I kind of want to give you a hug right now. I mean, like you're pretty spot on with what you're talking about, right? Like I think in the world of sports, the way I would translate that and the way I communicate with the coach is like, isn't it amazing how 90% of our efforts can go to 5% of the team? And normally that 90% effort is going to the 5% that are most off task. And it's sort of like, Steve Jobs had that great quote of like, I'd rather have a few, A pluses than a whole bunch of C minuses.
Yeah.
And that goes back to like getting the right people on and the wrong people off as soon as possible. So when you ask about like, where do I try to make the most impact or in what ways can I help an organization? Earlier in my career, I started with the players. I was like, oh, it's the players, right? Like the players are out there.
Or a small number of the players, like.
Well,
if you've got a roster of 30,
right?
you'd be spending your time with 3 or 4?
Because the 3 or 4 right ones can help motivate the rest of the group, right?
They can do your work for you.
Yes. And that's just it, right? Like trying to be a resource versus trying to be the sage on the stage, right? So I don't care who in the group says the right answer in the room or in that moment, as long as the right answer is said. So I actually prefer, one of my mentors gave me this, and it always held true to me. He goes, Scott, when you're working in the pro space, it's very easy to see where the cameras are pointed. And you can choose to be in front of the camera or behind the camera. So like when I was working with NFL teams, like the one I'm with now, I'll be on the sidelines. And I know, like it's very easy to see where the cameras are. And so if I want to be on TV, all I have to do is wear bright clothes and just sit behind the coach when there's a decision to be made or sit next to the player who just turned the ball over and I'm on TV. I choose not to. It's their moment. It's the coach's moment. It's the player's moment. It's their moment. I'd rather be a resource that they value and use however they want to use than make it like sometimes you'll see this storyline, especially like during the Olympics. I don't know when this is going to air, but during the Olympics, you see the same story where it's player X was broken. They go to guru Y who fixed them. And now player X owes their life and their career trajectory. And I'm going like, it's not about the guru. It's about the work. And let's start with the player who invested in doing the work. Yes, the two of them contributed to the work, but it's the work that I think is special, not the individuals. So thanks for letting me get on a podium and preach a little bit. Going back to it, because I think it's important to make sure I answer your questions. I started with the players. And then I quickly realized the players are only as good as the coaches who create this environment. So then I really started focusing on the coaches. And then I started to notice like the coaches are really important. However, it's the front office who helps create that staff and also assembles the team. So then I was like, oh, I should be really working with the front office. And then I ended up matriculating to ownership. Like there's that expression, the fish rots from the head first.
Yeah.
So I stumbled upon this early in my career where ownership really matters. Like you mentioned, I work for the Golden State Warriors right now. That ownership group is the best ownership group I've ever been around. They are unbelievable human beings. They're in the building every day. They're active and they're good listeners and they're invested in winning and winning the right way. And they invest in people and they invest in culture. And so I think right now I'm focused a lot on ownership and helping matriculate. So that's a big word. I don't even know if I used it right. Helping deliver messaging all the way through. But really, whoever's in front of me, if it's a player, I focus on them. If it's a coach, I focus on them. If it's a front office person, I focus on them. And I just try to go where they need to go in order to get the clarity that they need to do their job best.
It's funny you say that because it's hard to think of a team in any sport that's been successful that don't have their front office in order.
Right? And that's where you go, gosh, maybe that's not by mistake. Maybe there's something to it.
It's not a coincidence. And
the other thing, going back to like the price law and everything else, is there's actually some new research that's coming out, and I'll be curious to see if this catches on fire or not, where they're talking about leave your top performers alone and actually focus on your bottom performers. The reason why is like mental errors cause losing. it's kind of like what you were saying earlier, like more teams. There's an old adage, the New England Patriots kind of started this mindset in the NFL, which is like, before you can win games, you have to prevent yourself from losing games. More teams lose games than they do win games. And so it's funny because now there's some literature that's kind of supporting that, which says, hey, go after the people who make the biggest mental errors. Leave the top performers alone.
They'll coach themselves. They're not a demand. That's always the pro of bringing in an experienced player. They're not a drain on resources, because what you see is what you get. You can sort of let them do their thing. They can look after themselves.
Right. And so like the way that I kind of am digesting this literature right now, it is kind of fascinating, is instead of trying to raise the ceiling, which is often what you hear from sports psychology, like bigger, stronger, faster. Let's make, the person who's got the third fastest time in the world, let's help them get the first. Instead of raising the ceiling, this literature is making the argument we should be raising the floor. That a team will be better if we just make 3 less errors. And if you look at, and I'll just use NFL for a second here.
I like that. Raise the floor.
Right. Isn't that neat? So in the NFL, just to support it, if you're in the red zone, 20 yards from scoring a touchdown, if you commit a penalty inside the red zone, your chances of scoring a touchdown go down 50%. So before you go and make that incredible tight window pass, you got to make sure the left guard doesn't false start. So if we focus on raising the floor, less errors are made, the probability of scoring a touchdown. In other words, like as good as Tom Brady is, or fill in the blank quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, what makes those guys so great is they can convert a 3rd down and 3 as easily as they can a 3rd and 13. So if the left tackle false starts, they're like, we got this. Whereas quarterbacks that are maybe 2nd tier, 3rd tier down the line, 3rd down and 3 versus 3rd down and 13 is a huge difference for them to compensate. Same thing with play calling. Brilliant play callers. Kevin O'Connell, the Minnesota Vikings' head coach, he's known as a brilliant play caller, offensive genius, and really awesome person to work with. It's a lot harder when it's 3rd and 13 versus 3rd and 3 in the red zone.
That's stacking the odds in your favor to succeed, right? That's looking at trends in the game, data-driven decision making. Like, let's not beat ourselves here. We don't beat ourselves by doing X. So you don't focus on the person making the play. You focus on the person that's most likely to mess up the play.
That's this new literature that's coming out, and I'm kind of going, oh, this is interesting. So let's go back to the comprehensive athletic profile. Could people make a mistake because of physical limitations? Yeah, they're just slower than their opponent, so they can't get there. Could they do it based off of experience? Yeah, they might not know the answers to the test, so to speak. Could they do it from a personality standpoint? Yeah, they could freeze up in the big moment. They could be anxious, or they could be, turds in a punch bowl who are out partying all night before, and so they're just not ready to play. And could it be like they just don't see the game, like their intelligence? They might not be able to process or understand what's going on in the moment and then recalibrate. I mean, what's really fascinating about intelligence, and again, I want to bring my partner Jim Bowman, like, world of credit. Like when we developed the AIQ, what we noticed was people with high levels of intelligence have a real track record. It's like one of the best predictors of success across all domains: firefighters, airline pilots, lawyers, and also in sports. So what we're noticing is people with really strong AIQ profiles, they do make less mistakes. And they can even compensate for some of these other deficiencies that are in those other domains. It's, again, when it's 3rd and 3 and a guy false starts, you can watch now because they're all taught in the meetings. There goes our chances, Yeah,
you're making everybody else's job harder now.
Bingo.
I just want to take you back.
Yeah.
The fish rots from the head.
Yeah, that's a good one. Noah Kroom gave me that line.
You go into an organization and see front office isn't how it should be.
Yeah.
Where does that conversation go?
So do I have it?
Those are the people that have hired you, right?
So this is an unintentional discovery on my part. The last 4 jobs I've been hired was by the owner, which when you think about this, like some people go, oh, that must be great. You walk in and everybody goes, hey, this guy's endorsed by the owner, so you must be golden. It can go the other way. Oh, here comes a spy, right? Like, is this guy going to tell the owner that I did X, Y, and Z?
But have you ever had to tell the owner, you're the rotting head?
Yes, I have had that conversation.
Really?
Not with my current ownership. They're amazing, but yes, I've had that conversation.
Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't say, hey, you're the rotting head. But what I try to point out is I say, hey, I watched you engage in this behavior, which can be a verbal behavior or a physical one, like they throw a tantrum or they said something. And I said, I'm intrigued by that. I'm curious. And so normally what I'll do is I'll say, can you help me understand where this came from? I'm a big believer that no one's a villain in their own story. So with this one that's coming to my mind, because you're asking about this, I had a lot of compassion for him because I think in his mind, he was doing what had helped him be really successful that made him a billionaire. But what he was doing was creating a lot of chaos and instability. And in the world of pro sports, like, it's already chaotic on the field. It's already unstable. When the average length of an NFL coach's career is 2.7 years, players too. Creating more instability really bred a lot of insecurity and a lot of anxiety. So I said to him, where's this coming from? And then he explained where it was from him. And he's a super smart guy. And he goes, why are you asking, Doc? And I go, well, I'm watching how people are reacting to it. And I'm noticing that you're not watching how they're reacting to it. So I'm wondering if your intent is different than the impact that it's having. So I was trying to do, in a very gentle way, show how he contributes to the opposite of what he was trying to achieve, and not make it about him, but really about his attempt or his intervention. Because I think he was coming at it from like, gosh, I just want this to really work. What he was saying, just to give you perspective, was it was a lot of like, we got to get this right or we're going to make a lot of changes here kind of stuff. And he thought he was motivating the troops kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
that
really,
level of that style of motivation is
right, burn the boats,
yeah,
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what was happening and what I was witnessing was a lot of the coaches went back to their office and started making phone calls around the league like, hey, you know of a tight end coach position? You know, is there a tight end position available? And because that's what happens in the league.
It is a little bit old school military style, which still does exist in sport, where it's that dictatorship and they never make any. Those people never make mistakes, and like it.
I think the pendulum swings.
Yeah,
we go from being strong, militant, sort of authoritarian style coaching, and then the pendulum swings to being very relational, and that's why it's like once the system. There's 32 teams in the NFL, for example. There's 30 in the NBA. In the NFL, every Sunday, 16 teams are going to lose. No matter if it's an authoritarian coach or a relational coach, 16 are going to lose and 16 are going to win. And what separates the winners from the losers is probably a whole lot of luck and everything else, but mostly a whole lot of luck. So I find fans, media, people like you and me, we're always trying to make meaning out of this meaninglessness. And we'll go, oh, well, it must be because he's too much of an authoritarian coach. So what do? They fire that guy and they bring in a relational coach. And then the relational coach, you'll see like an uptick in spiked performance. And they go, see, we were right. And then, of course, we return to the baseline. And they
people get away with too much.
Yeah. Inmates are running the asylum, that kind of stuff. And then it's like, oh, got to fire the relational coach and bring in. And going back to the owner, that was one of the things he had done historically was he had a whole lot of turnover. And some owners do that. It's all about turnover, and then they get lucky where they hit a stride with one of those moments. And I'm going like, you know, you're asking, another piece of feedback I gave the owner because of the threat and everything is I said, you want long-term success here? And he goes, yeah. I said, but you're asking them to achieve short-term goals that I think might be jeopardizing long-term success. So do you want them to win in the short term, or do you want to give them a long enough runway to build something substantive here? And that's the kind of stuff.
I guess in sports, though, time is what we all wish for, but
rarely ever get.
It's not always afforded to us.
Well, I think that's the paradox.
They want wins yesterday.
You have to win now more than ever, because fan bases can be really intense and fickle, right? Like, one of the things that you'll see in the English Premier League and in the NFL, the new trend is you hire a former player from previous glory. And the reason why is they get longer runways to fail. So in the NFL right now, there's a head coach, Dan Campbell, who's a former tight end for the Detroit Lions, part of their glory years. He goes 1-7 as a head coach to start it or something. It was bad. It was a bad, rough start. Most people run him out of the building, but the fan base remembered him as the former glory. So this new kind of hiring strategy is
that by design?
Yeah. So that way they have a longer runway.
The owner goes, I'm going to hire a former great, and it will just give us
a little bit more grace. It gives the fan base and the media just a little bit more grace. Now, soon people are going to figure that out maybe, and then that trick will no longer be employed. But yeah, that's, again, I think the paradox in sports is, in order to have long-term success, you have to sometimes sacrifice short-term wins. But you will not be around long enough to see that long-term stuff if you don't get those short-term wins, which sometimes can sacrifice the long-term goals. A good example of that is when you're told, tell a coach they have to win now, they go get a bunch of veteran players that are at a high caliber price point who can win in 1 or 2 years, but their productivity quickly declines because their age, and now they've got no rebuild. So you give it a guy who the fan base has more grace, like a former player, gives them a longer runway, and you go, hey, you can build with some young players, and you guys can all grow together, and we'll all endure the turbulence of the short-term season. But that's, you got to get an owner, because I think the owners, they feel the weight of the city. Again, no one's a villain in their own story. Owners want to do this for the city. They want to do this for the team. These guys and gals are billionaires. They're not doing this for economic gain.
It's interesting you say that about the former great coming into an organization. I can think of a couple that spring to mind, and that runway extension that they're afforded. Just again on the fish rotting from the head, I guess the bad apples, the cancers in the group. Do you look to try and turn them around and bring them on board, or is it just a simple, you'll do your AIQ, you'll have some conversations, figure them out, and you'll make a recommendation to, would it be head coach, head of recruitment, owner, we need to cut this guy loose? So
just again, to be real clear, I don't think I've ever walked into an office and been like, we got to cut that guy. I mean, I just think human beings are way more complicated. I know that decision is that binary, like, are we keeping them or are we letting them go? What I try to do is I try to help people be well-informed. And what I mean by that is, if we're going to keep them, I think these are the resources we're going to have to put in place in order to get the best out of them. Again, production is environment times person. So if we've highlighted certain aspects of the person, we better make sure that we have an environment that amplifies that aspect so that we get the production we want. Production equals environment times person. So what I'll do is I don't go into the room and say, hey, let's cut, Jones. I say, this is some things that I've observed about Jones through the process. Here's what we have in our environment. Now, is that kind of like peanut butter and jelly, or is that more like peanut butter and Vegemite? I tried to throw that in there because we're in Australia, and I don't know if peanut butter and Vegemite. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I don't know if that works. But that's the thing that we got to kind of figure out. And then I help them. I go, there's some unbelievably gifted players who can be really problematic to deal with.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, okay, you know, it's funny, we talk about how important culture is and everything else, and it's like, culture's important until your best player is the last one to show up at practice. It's like, are you going to cut that one? Where do you replace that productivity? And again, going back to like big time decisions is when a head coach cuts the best player and says, this is going to be good for us, you got to now watch how the fan base says, we really like, I just spent $80 on that jersey, you know, what are you doing? So these things are complicated. None of these decisions are ever in isolated bubbles. And I just try to help when I can and where I can.
You used the word there that very much a buzzword in sports right now, culture. Mm-hmm. How do you describe culture? Like what does it mean?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I have used the word a lot today. That's a good catch on your part, because you know what's funny is I don't really like the word. I think it's mutated. So here's where I stand. I think there's a real shift in power in sports right now. I think the athletes and the players have more power, especially in North America, like with the NIL deals and the money and everything else. Like there's a shift in power so that, well, all right, sorry. Let's go deep on this for a sec if we can, and hopefully this doesn't bore everyone who's listening. In any relationship dynamic, the person who's least invested has all the power. And the reason for that is whether it's a married couple or a boss and an employee or two friends, the least invested person has more power, because when conflict arises, not if, but when, because conflict always arises, the least invested person will be the first to say, I'm going to terminate this relationship. So when you think about coaches and players, most coaches were once players, but most players do not become coaches. So the coaches are the players that still want to be in the building when they no longer can play. So already that puts them at a greater investment. But now we have a situation where salaries, again, NIL and everything else, players make so much more money than the coaches. So it becomes one of these things where it's like, I don't, you know, again, who's more invested, who's less invested? That's where the power dynamic lies. So when I'm looking at some of these shift in power relationship dynamics, it becomes an element of how do we unpack someone's passion and purpose? How do we understand why they get out of bed every day and what they're doing it for? And what ways can we kind of push that button or pull on that rod that really helps unpack that? So going back to the term culture, I think what has happened is coaches are struggling right now to be bad people or accountability people. You know, service leadership is the new term, and supportiveness and all that kind of stuff. And again, because there's a shift in power, the access that fan bases have to the players, they can just go on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, and you can DM your favorite player, and your player can see that. So, and players can now tweet or post whatever they want about their own injury or anything else that the team can't manage, right? So this power dynamic and this shift in power is causing a relationship dynamic that I think we're trying to figure out. And the reason why I don't like the word culture is I think a lot of times when you'll hear a coach say, hey, the culture's bad, what they're really saying is like, I don't like the guys in the locker room, right? And when you hear players say the culture's bad, what they're really saying is like, I don't really like the coaches. But we can't confront anyone. Like, there is an element now that feels like we're a lot more conflict avoidant in sports and maybe in life a little bit, as we have so much conflict that's going around. And maybe I'm talking more from a North American standpoint, and it's an election year, and that kind of comes up too. But there is this idea. So going back to it, it's a less sexy word, but I think I use the word system dynamics more. People just go, what does that mean? And I go, well, system dynamics is really about understanding the interaction of people. You and I are having a moment right now. We're interacting. I don't know if we're ever going to see each other again or talk again or anything else, but I'm enjoying the conversation. And that might make me more invested than you. Like, you're like, hey, we're out of time, and thanks, Scott, and we'll see you later. But and I'd be like, no, please don't go. We're just getting started. But the idea here is like, if you understand who the people are in the world, in the organization, in the system, and then you also start to understand why they and how they resonate off of one another. So here would be a concrete example. I discourage familial talk. Don't say I love you like a son. I tell that to coaches. Don't tell a player I love you like a son. They go, why not? I love him like a son. I go, well, would you ever trade your son for another like future draft pick or anything? They're like, no, it's my son. I go, right. Would you trade that guy for a future draft pick? Because it depends on the player. I go, right. So don't tell him you love him like a son when there are things that you would do to him that you would never do to your own child.
Well, one of the terms in our sport, rugby league, it's like, oh, we're like brothers. And it's like, no.
We're not. Yeah, that's right. And so there is a bond, right?
Yeah, there is a bond.
And there is something, like, I'll never enter a locker room unless I'm given permission. I think the locker room is a sacred space. In any organization, it's like the locker room doesn't lie. So I never enter the locker room unless I'm invited. And I've been invited by a few players in a few circumstances for some pretty important reasons. Unbelievable honor of my life. But the locker room doesn't lie. And so there is a bond. There is a like oxytocin. That's that bond chemical that, you know, that we feel as tribes. There is a bond that occurs, but it's not a brotherhood, to your point. And so I think...
Oh, it's maybe a very short-term brotherhood.
Well, it is, right, until he makes a mistake. Because I know with my sibling, you know, I love her unconditionally. And she makes mistakes all the time, as much, if not less than the mistakes I make. But we don't ever threaten to fire each other or throw each other under the bus or anything like that. And that happens in sports. So thank you for letting me go down this rabbit hole. But I think the way I would land on this is culture is really about relationship and relationship dynamics. And I do think relationships are incredibly important. I have witnessed when people start to check out of the relationship in a team. And I'm sure you have too, where you're going like, God, it's amazing how unbelievably talented these people are, and yet they won't really play for each other. And then I've seen the opposite, where you're going like, oh my gosh, like there are certain people, and I don't know if you notice, like I try not to name drop, but there are certain people that I've been around where I'm going like, what an unbelievable human being. And you watch the way the rest of their universe changes as they walk through it, you know? In the NFL, there's two people that will change a room, the head coach and the quarterback. You're getting taped, your ankles taped in the training room, and one of those two walk in and the whole room alters. And I'm sure you see that like in you know, like the rugby league and rugby union and Aussie football. Like I know that the sports down here have that same kind of power points. And so you brought this up earlier, like would you go after those guys and make sure that they're doing the right stuff, or do you go after... all of the above. Like, let's just check every box. I mean, to win the whole thing, I think you got to check every box.
Is there anything you can do to shape the environment to help those relationships prosper? If culture is all about relationships, you know, can you paint the walls blue, light blue? Don't paint them pink.
Right.
Like, is there things that any sport and organization can do to help those prosper? You know, we hear sometimes, oh, what's behind this team's success? Oh, well, they've moved the football staff's offices down to the floor,
that's right,
like next to the gym, and those little conversations that help those relationships flourish and reach their potential.
Yeah. So, a really fun question. We put words on walls all the time. What's funny is those words have impact on the people who came up with those words. The process of getting to those words. So what are the words? Grit, power, you know, fortune favors the bold, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Like all of those words. Words on walls are great. But 98% of the people who walk by those words, they don't have meaning to them because they didn't generate it. So one of the things that I point out with leaders, whether it's a head coach, the team president, GM, owner, is I go, hey, why are you putting those words on the wall? And they'll go, oh, isn't that cool? I heard that the fill in the blank team, our opponents do it. I'm like, all right, so do you believe in those words, or you just think those words cause winning? And they're like, oh, I never thought about that. Well, what words would you recommend? I go, I don't know. Let's ask the team. So I've done this with a few teams where I said, before we put anything on let's leave the walls blank just for a while. And let's have some thought exchange over the course of a few weeks or even a month. So I took a dry erase board, I put it in a very public place, and I started with the words that the head coach really liked. I circled them. And then I just let the rest of the team kind of add as they walked by. And before you knew it, it looked like a chaotic mess of just like word vomit. But then they stuck with it, and you started to see certain themes connect. So like the coach had, what was one of the ones that the coach had that I thought was really cool? It was consistency. And then one of the players will, bring it every day. And I'm like, wait, those two ideas kind of connect.
Basically the same thing, right?
Right. But they both came from an internal fire versus it just being a word that they walked. So after spending about a month, it went from nothing on the board to all of a sudden too much on the board to then things starting to kind of group. It was almost like a word cloud, and they started to group, and then certain things kind of formed. And what was really cool was the team took ownership of the concept. It wasn't something that was it was no longer just a word on a wall. It was an organic concept that the team adopted so that we didn't even have to put it on the walls if we didn't want to. They all felt it. You know what I mean? They all knew it. They walked it. That kind of stuff, I think, has some pretty cool impact. So if someone's out there listening and they're a head coach and they're like, oh, I want to do words on the wall, I'd say, hey, before you do that, you should think about what is your own values? What's your own kind of mission statement? And then how do I want to convey and teach that mission statement and concept to everybody else?
How'd you get buy-in?
But see, that's just it. Like, I don't think you can convince people to buy into it. They either believe it or they don't. I think you should find the people who believe it, and you should hold on to them versus trying to recruit people to believe it. And the idea, if your idea is a good one, if your concept's a good one, I think people want to join you and ride the ride with you. So let's do this. We'll have a little bit of fun, maybe.
Okay.
Do you have a personal mission statement?
No.
Well, let's brainstorm one for a bit. What are some of the things that are valuable to you? What has helped shape your career? That's helped you land in the space that you're in right now?
I'm probably a very different person than the one I was.
Okay.
When I used to play. Coming out of professional sport was very lost, and almost became. I am now the person I used to hate, the former player that's in the media. Although I'd like to think I bring something a little bit different to the party. What drives me now, the ability to spend time with family.
Oh, interesting.
Not being all in on something. So I was all in on playing professional sports. It was the axis upon which my world spun. Probably a little bit more of a relaxed approach. So the ability to spend time with family is really important. Obviously doing seasonal work as well, that can be more lopsided to the, I guess, quote unquote off season. What else drives?
So let's unpack that.
Yeah, okay.
There's some good stuff there, right? What you've highlighted is the turbulence of transitioning away from something, right? Hey, the center of my universe was sport and everything around it was sport. And now I've transitioned, we're a family, and I'm still seeking almost a blend, not a balance, but a blend. So as you were navigating this space, this podcast, this transition to this new world, what was something that guided you in your decision-making? What was a value or a concept that guided you in your decision-making?
probably the lack of certainty.
Okay. Now pull on that thread. How did you navigate the lack of certainty? What kept you going when your finish line was unknown?
I sort of adopted let's just say yes to everything.
There it is. Now all of a sudden we've got a value that we can play with. Now you've got people that have joined you. Like, I mean, as we were setting up all of this stuff, you have these people that joined you on this mission quest.
Well, it was Charlie's idea.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
When you said yes,
said yes, let's do it, because I was saying yes to most things that came my way because I was uncertain about the future. A lot of certainty in professional. Well, yeah, all our contracts were pretty tight. Barring injury, I backed myself to play.
There it is.
Till sort of mid-30s, which I did.
So here's how I would try to kind of play with the experience. Some people think the origin of sport is soldiers waiting to go into battle trying to stay sharp. Iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah.
So it was, soldiers were waiting and they thought, let's wrestle while we're hanging out. And, that's a sport. I actually think the origin of sport was like Zog from Cave Nuck Nuck, who was walking the savannah and just was bored and was like, I wonder how far I can throw a rock. I think that something that's kind of uniquely, universally human is our natural curiosity and desire to explore. Like I said earlier, we're the only species to go to the moon. Sharks have never gone to the moon because we looked at that thing and went, like where dogs only bark at the moon, we go, I wonder what it looks like up there. So there's a part of me that's wondering if a authentic, curious, exploratory mindset is what drove you through sport. I wonder how good I can be. When you could no longer be the best that you could be in sport, you started to navigate and go, I wonder how good of a father I can be or a husband. And then you went, I wonder what else I could do that would be kind of fun. And this kind of curious explorer mentality or aspect within you gravitated others who said, hey, you want to play? I kind of want to play. You said Charlie?
Yeah.
So Charlie goes, you want to do this podcast thing? And you're like, I'm a curious explorer. And he goes, yeah, me too. Let's see what happens. Like, we have no aim or mission other than let's just see if we can. And my guess is your popularity and the show's popularity is you ask these really meaningful questions that come from a place of you just being curious. And
I do like to talk. I do like having conversations with people. I'm not a social media. I don't have a personal social media profile.
Yeah, me either.
I don't like that way of communication. I actually like to sit down and talk ideas and hash things out and talk to interesting people.
There it is, right? And that's the curiosity. So it's like, I mean, look, we should have a pint right now. I mean, the conversation would go in a totally different direction or devolve maybe. So I would encourage you to walk away from this conversation and think about refining this curious explorer essence and be like, gosh, I wonder if I could come up with almost like a one sentence way of explaining this North Star. You don't have to put it on the wall, but I think as you feel it, you'll notice how it guides every decision you make. And then you'll start to see people who want to join you because they're like, I like your courageousness in exploring. I want to explore too. So kind of like when you said, like, what are you doing in Australia? I'm kind of a curious explorer too. And when you said, hey, you want to be on this podcast? I'm like, yeah, because you're asking me all these really cool questions and I don't know where we're going. It's kind of an unscripted dialogue. And let's see. I mean, we might end up with some really cool ideas that could really help out a lot of neat people. Or this is one that never makes it to air. Either way, I'm glad that we're here together.
One of the things about in life I've looked at, I've probably done things a little bit differently. I guess most people would say that I've done things differently, but I think by not having a North Star and being too driven to hit metrics, hit targets, have too many goals to reach in terms of subscribers, views, etc. It actually helps because we are then by our very nature a little bit more relaxed in our approach, which I think then people can relate to and actually by not being, because if you wanted to get numbers, you could just be super controversial, right?
That's right. But that's not your aim. Like what you remind me of is the great...
Ed Sheeran. It's Ed Sheeran.
No,
Yeah.
it's funny that
I know.
I was like, gosh,
I know.
you look so much like Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
Like a much more attractive Ed Sheeran.
I'll take that.
But what I was going to say is, you remind me actually of the Grateful Dead. Like, remember one of the taglines from the Grateful Dead, the music group, the Grateful Dead, was, "Not all who wander are lost." So you're going like, hey, I'm kind of wandering, but I don't see you as somebody who's lost. You're just saying, my reasons for doing this are not the reasons that other people might do this, like hitting numbers or making money. And I think the authenticity of your exploratory desires is what's having people join your journey with you. They're like, I wonder where this guy's going with this. And you're like, I don't know either, but that's kind of fun, isn't it? I think that's a pretty cool place to be in.
I always thought I'd be a coach.
Yeah.
As well. I always wanted to be a coach. But then I realized that I didn't want that life that comes with coaching. I had to look behind the curtain. Didn't want the uncertainty, the move at the drop of a hat, which is doable, but it's a big sacrifice that I just don't want to make. And had a number of concussions. One of the ways to, I guess, one of the modifiable risk factors is stress.
Yeah.
And the stress of coaching, I don't think it would have done me any good. So, and also that value of spending time with family, it's a huge sacrifice for everybody that's in your inner circle.
I have such a tremendous amount of respect for coaches and their sacrifice, because you can really only have one number one. And it's hard because a lot of coaches will preach about how much they value and care about their family, but they miss birthdays, they miss anniversaries. I mean, the schedule, again, just use the NFL. I think it's preseason right now in North America, so I've got NFL brain, whereas NBA, we're off, right? But, those games are played 1:00 on Sunday, no matter what. Like, it doesn't matter if, a loved one is having a hard day or, your father is sick in the hospital. Like, hey, kickoff's at 1:00, be ready. So I find the psyche of coaches to be an area that I really value and try to make contributions to in any organization I work. To your point, players go home after practice. Coaches go back to their offices and then they sleep on their couches. It's a different digestion.
I want to ask you about an idea.
Oh, I would love this. Yeah. Should we bring Charlie in?
No, this was my idea.
Okay. Sorry, Charlie.
About coaching.
Okay.
Right. So, thought a lot about the placebo effect, right?
Yeah.
And how it works in medicine.
Sure.
So, I thought about a project called Project PEP.
After Pep Guardiola?
No.
Okay.
Called Performance Enhancing Placebo.
Okay.
So, in year 2 of my coaching journey with a club, it'll be second year, so I've established and trust in year 1. The preseason of year 2, I tell the players, I introduce them to a doctor who's wearing a lab coat. Has to be a lab coat because it affects.
Yes, Stanley Milgram proved that. You're right.
This all affects on the
Yeah.
delivery and the importance of the messenger and all the effects. And we would go to an off-site and we would inject the players with a substance that we would tell them cannot be detected by asada water, but is going to increase their performance like they've never seen before. But what we're giving them is saline solution.
Yeah.
Or sugar pills. But they believe that they're receiving performance enhancing drugs, but it's all a placebo. Now, I don't know ethically where this would land, but coaches, I don't know how much they care about ethics anyway. I know if I was a coach, I want to win. So what's my slight edge to win?
Yeah.
I'm going to bring in Project PEP. It's going to be, like I would put, obviously, if I had gone down the coaching track, there'd be a lot more thought in terms of that, where this, like it would all be meticulous about where it was conducted, whether or not everybody gets in, those that Pareto distribution. Do I just go and bring in on board 4 or 5 of the best players? Do I go to your point, those players that are underperforming, how can I get them to get their potential? It's maybe a lack of trust because it's a lie.
Yeah.
But
so
what can I ask you your would I be able, or would a coach be able to pull off Project Pep? It's certainly more morally acceptable than actually giving the players performance enhancing substances.
So,
but do you think it would work?
Here's where I would start. If you actually came to me as a coach and said, I'm really thinking about this idea, should I do it? The first thing I would say is, look, every solution generates a new set of problems. The fact that you're bringing this up as an undetectable drug and WADA and everything else you're already setting a culture of win above all else and no rules are applicable. And I would ask, is that kind of the culture that you want? Like, do you want cutthroat mercenaries that'll win by any means necessary? And are we willing to accept that solution, Project PEP, is going to have a potential side effect, which is this kind of mercenary, ruthless kind of mindset?
Win at all costs.
Yeah. And if you say, yeah, I'm okay with that, I'd say, okay, let's explore that. Now, I'll be honest with you, I would be less inclined to join the journey because I do value competition and I really enjoy competitive people. Yet at the same time, I think there is something honorable about the rules that we agree to. But those that are written and those that are unwritten.
But so, what I wouldn't be breaking any rules.
No, other than the rule of being inauthentic and violating the trust. And so I think the concept has its flaws from a relationship dynamic. I think it will be effective until somebody discovers that there's no magic pill.
It's saline solution.
It's saline solution. And then I think what you'll see is bloop. Now, why I think it will work is because instability and uncertainty, which is the backbone of sport, unpredictability, breeds a high level of anxiety. And one of the ways most people attack anxiety is with control. So we've been using Project PEP, actually, it's for decades. And you know what it is? Playoff beards and magic lucky socks and not washing our shirt when we win and all these other kinds of superstitions. Yes. Yeah. So all you're really doing is you're just playing into minimizing the anxiety through a sense of perceived control. So if we were to do it, the one thing I would augment is I would say, instead of saying, hey, we're going to break all these rules, is say, hey, this magic pill has no side effects. It's been researched and it's totally legal. And you could even make the argument, like, you started talking about breathing earlier. And there's some science to support breathing, but the belief in breathing could be an amplifier, right?
Most certainly.
And so to your point, I would say, why don't we just pick something that's a little bit more harmless, a little bit more authentic and truthful, maybe something that's even a little bit more backed, and just say, hey, we're going to buy into this as our competitive advantage. And so I think what we could try to do is generate a solution that doesn't have the kind of side effects that we just tripped over.
But I think to get a greater percentage in performance advantage, you need to go, the devil's in the detail. And I think you need the lab coat, you need the offsite, you need to make people feel special and help them believe in this.
Yeah. So fundamentally, at its essence, you're really talking about the power of belief. So here's an interesting one. They've done studies where they've had people pray and plants grew more. They did a study where they had people pray and people got better who are sick.
Yeah.
So what if we, and I'm not talking about being a high faith person myself, but what if we said, let's focus on faith and really go after players and personnel that are high faith character people. A lot less side effects, as we know, with high faith. There's lower incidences of certain, conflicting behaviors and stuff like drinking and all that. But okay, and let's just talk about the power of prayer. Get us all to believe in that faith, and let's just pray for one another. And so I think, to your point, like, yes, we could use the white lab coat. Yes, we could go science, but we could also go faith. I think there's ways that we can play with your vision, the placebo effect, but do it without any of the caustic elements. Like, hey, to have you feel a level of conviction, this is untestable. Let's just pray.
But then I think within certain team dynamics, you would have some players that would shun that and be very the anti, not necessarily anti-religion, but more of an atheist approach.
Yeah.
So, and like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm just doing this for the sake of doing it.
Production is environment times person. So if you have a high faith person and a high faith environment, I think you're going to have a high level of production. But if you have a high faith environment and a person with less faith, they might be less inclined to buy into it. So then it becomes the idea of, could the person without the faith have a different driver or motivator so that they're still performing at a high level, even though they don't believe in the magic pill?
Yeah.
Because to your point, the magic pill concept or the saline solution still requires a level of people believing in it. I mean, fundamentally what you're talking about is, can you get people to believe in something? And what's really magical about sport is we get people to believe in stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, there's like a little mosquito.
Yeah, I've been watching it.
Yeah,
too.
I'm trying not to be distracted by it, but I think I got it. Maybe not.
No.
So think about the belief in like a rally monkey, right? Like there was that for a while. There was a baseball team in North America where this monkey kind of came out of nowhere, and then the team won, and then they made that the thing. So they brought out the rally, or music. Like, we can get people to believe in anything, but I think the essence of it is to believe. I think belief is a very powerful thing.
It's huge.
And whether we're believing in faith, or we're believing in science, or we're believing in each other, or we're believing in lucky socks, like, I think what I would pull on as your coaching mechanism is, let's have a team that really believes in the cause. Like, let's believe in each other. Like, let's focus on the essence of your idea, which is the power of belief, and get rid of some of the other sort of risk factors. Like, hey guys, don't worry, we're not going to get tested positive, or they get
it would
coach
need
lied to us.
It would need refining. Here's where I can really drive this belief in how this sugar pill or saline solution works.
Yeah.
So we do the yo-yo test, which is basically a beep test.
Yeah.
We shorten the lines.
There's a lot of ways to be deceptive.
So we do the 20-meter beep test at the start of the preseason. We go on Project Pep. It's 19.5 when we repeat the test. The weights, because funnily enough, this actually happened to me.
Okay.
And this is where this all actually started. So, doing flat incline bench press with dumbbells. And when I was playing at one of the teams, the St. George Illawarra Dragons, they'd got the wrong weights. So the 52 kilogram weight on the dumbbells, I had shoulder issues, so it's not actually a lot of weight, but I was going on the 50s, did the 50s, I'll get the 52s out. And I was like pumped to do that, and I flew through them, and I was like feeling so good about myself. I've gone up, like never done over 50 before. And then I went, I'm going to go to the 54s, and it was like, could not move them. I was like, fuck. Oh. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to pop these 52s on the scale. And they were like 49.5.
Oh, interesting.
They were labeled as 52s.
Huh.
And so this experiment happened on me almost by accident. I was delighted with the fact I felt stronger than ever. But then the truth sort of, It was just, oh. But imagine if I'd never found out and how much stronger I'd feel. And I know with a strong level of certainty that coaches have done this before where they've maybe at the start of preseason extended the beep test to 20.5 meters and gone that, or 21 meters. They've walked it out. We're just going to extend it. And then we're going to get into everyone and say how they're not fit enough, which is going to drive this belief, hey, if we're not fit enough, we need to start getting fit. So we need to train harder. So, yeah, I guess.
Well, let's pull on this thread for a sec. If you look at the literature, highly successful leaders have elements of sociopathic behavior.
Yeah.
Because at some point they have to make hard decisions that can be a little bit icky or a little bit sticky. Like, hey, they might have to fire their best friend, or they might have to cut a player that they really care about, and that kind of stuff. So
stab someone in the back.
They might.
Like, yeah, a lot. It's cutthroat, right?
It's funny because one person's inspiration is another person's manipulation. And so I don't fault, like, it's funny, there's a great book, what's it called? The Art of a Sociopath or something like that, where it talks about how, sociopathic behavior actually can be really helpful and beneficial in society because they can make the hard decisions. Like, dropping a bomb on 2 cities in Japan and killing thousands of people is a really hard decision, but may have saved countless other lives.
Would you kill a fat man? Trolleyology, right?
The trolleyology, yes. That's, so for those that don't know, right, is a trolley's going out of control and you have the ability to prevent it from killing 6 people, but what you have to do is you have to push a fat guy in front of it, but ultimately kills the fat guy.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, like, do you kill 1 in order to save 6? And what's interesting was about the study was if you pull a lever that reroutes it to kill the person, you had a higher likelihood of people doing that because they felt like they weren't killing the person still had some fate. But if you push the person in front of the trolley, so you were now actively killing the person, there was less compliance. And so the question is, do we reward and value the sociopathic tendencies that might help a leader make a really tough decision in sport and in life? I think we do. And I would go back to the idea of, if we were to do this kind of deceptive strategy, Project PEP, I would start to kind of question a little bit the leadership style and how sociopathic it might go down and be. And I'm not so sure I'd want to join that journey. Like, I really like you and I think you're a neat dude and all of that, but if you're like, hey, I'm really committed to this, I think one of the luxuries that I've had in my life, in my own personal mission statement, which I'm happy to share with you if you want to hear it, I think my compass would probably, I would probably off-board.
So you'd have to say no.
I just don't think I would be effective for the organization because I couldn't get behind the concept of being deceptive.
In order to get results. So there's an element of, I want to do this in a truthful way. But then we know most successful sporting organizations and dynasties that they have something that usually people look twice at. So they've mismanaged salary cap.
Yeah.
You look at Lance Armstrong. Like, there's a lot of sporting leaders have something about them,
right? If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying kind of concept.
But I guess would.
So here's what I would
have
across.
People go. They're not going to win. I guess the good guy award in every city or every state that they're in. And it is sometimes funny how, as a fan, I love this guy because he's on my team, or this girl, but hate them when they're on the opposition because there's a little bit of an edge, or a psychopathic tendency about them where it's this win at all costs.
Well, that's the oxytocin though, right? Like oxytocin is about it's us versus them kind of thing. One of the perspectives I like to teach coaches and front office folks when we go down this rabbit hole or this path is we can honor competition too. Like instead of seeing our opponents as an enemy, we can see them. I kind of got this idea. I don't know if you remember, there was a famous director. His name was John Woo. And John Woo started out in I think he was in Asia, and he directed these amazing fight scenes. And so they brought him over to North America, and some of the best fight movies. And one of the things that was interesting was they were like, wow, how do you get these great fight scenes? And he said, I grew up watching Fred Astaire. I grew up watching dancers. He saw fight choreographed not as two competitors, but as two collaborators. So I thought, God, that's a really neat concept. What if we brought this into sport where we talked about honoring our competitors? That I want the team we're going to play against to give me their best. So it forces us to give our best. And let's go out there and see what happens when it's our best versus their best and let the chips fly. That to me is a really cool concept because if you think about it, there are overt rules like kickoffs at 1 o'clock that we all follow. We don't negotiate that. That's it. But we also have covert rules that we also all follow. Like, for example, in the NFL, it's very easy to spit in another person's mouth, in their face mask in a dog pile. Like, it's just a bunch of bodies on top of each other, and there's that guy that you're playing against. You could spit right in his face, and he could spit right in yours, but we've agreed to not do that, even though one of us could get away with it if we want to. So I think there's something kind of neat about honoring competition that isn't about win at all costs, but like, let's compete and see what happens.
I guess the counter argument to that is some teams need to play dirty to win because they understand that they don't have the ability.
Well, what's the old quote? A win without suffering is a triumph without glory. So I think one of the questions is if you cheat to win, first of all, you have to think about the definition of cheating because, again, some of the rules we agree to, like, how fast you drive on the highway, right? It could be, 100 kilometers per hour is the speed limit, but everybody's going 110. So we've all agreed to ignore certain rules too. So first you have to go, okay, what's the definition of cheating? And I think one definition of cheating is when you have a team that's willing to go somewhere that another team is not. And I think it becomes something where if you win that way, whether anyone else knows or not, you know. And if you go, I sleep great at night because I was willing to do anything it takes, win at all costs, then so be it. That's for you. But I think most people would say winning that kind of way where I'm not giving them my best leads the victory somewhat empty. And I would probably, if I was with a coach who was really preaching this kind of honesty, and I've been in that room, I would encourage some self-reflection there and see if they still want to do it. And would it really mean something to them? Because it's a lie that they will own in every building they go into where people tell them how brilliant they are. They will know.
But I guess with those psychopathic tendencies, you quickly block them out, right? You wouldn't even know.
Well,
like you could almost convince yourself that we know people are the power of belief, right? Well, either everyone else is doing it, or I'll park that in a part of the brain, close that door, lock it, throw away the key. I am the man. I am the winner. I am the champion. I'm sure when people have taken illegal performance enhancing drugs, they look in the mirror and they justify their behavior.
Some do. And sometimes that justification, so I've worked with folks that have been pretty close to that third rail. And I've listened to them. Now, look, the ones that maybe are totally fine with it, they're not coming to talk to me about it, right? So I can only say that the ones that I've interacted with that have gone close to that third rail are the ones that are conflicted. I think there's an element of conflict. I think the other thing too, though, is like at some point, sociopaths, the leading people with sociopathic tendencies who are leaders, at some point, they lose their followers. Like, you know, you still have to be authentic. And at some point, people start to go, you know, this guy that we're all following has done one too many things that's hard for me to... And so then you start to lose some pretty talented supporters.
Yeah. When you're in a group as well, like that, and talk about justifying behavior, the madness of crowds, you can act in a way you don't even realize it's wrong.
Yeah, we've got plenty of evidence in history to show that until somebody points out that it is.
I guess in a sporting team, now, if you get the glory, maybe you're doing something wrong or playing dirty, but you don't realize it's wrong, or you're being convinced it's wrong, you can, you know, perpetuate these behaviors. And well, there's a saying, winning solves everything.
Winning's the ultimate deodorant, right? So I go back to human beings are complicated.
Mm.
Human interaction is a multiplier of complication. Are there people out there who have justified winning at all costs? I think there are people out there. And the thing for me is some of those folks that I know that are closest to that level of intensity that you're describing, I think they're really suffering. You've given us a hypothetical, which is, gosh, if they're so sociopathic, like they just lock it in the box and they're... I'm not so sure. I mean, like, look, now we're getting real philosophical. Like, are human beings inherently good, or are human beings inherently evil, and all? And we can go down that rabbit hole and shoot. That's well beyond my level of scope of training and understanding. I don't know, and I think it's important to tell people you don't know when you don't know.
We all have the potential to do very evil things, and we also have the potential to do some amazing things for all of humanity. I guess environment does shape that, and the people around you shape that.
Yeah, and this is what's kind of neat about sport, right? Like, sport emulates life, and life emulates sport, and some of the codes and conducts that we engage in as human beings in microcosms like sport impact macrocosms like life. And I think when there's an opportunity to justify evil acts, there's also an opportunity to point out some of the suffering that those evil acts can cause.
Or maybe people justify it with balance.
Maybe. I mean, so...
Like, I'm a little bit good, but I'm a little bit bad. And yeah, you know what? May have, not played by the rules in all this, but look at all the good that I've done. Look at the joy I've brought to this city, or this team, or this fan base.
Yeah, well, that's the complexity of the threads that we pull on.
Or fuck it, everyone else is doing it anyway.
Right.
They're all playing dirty in their own way. This is rugby league. This is a man's sport. Well, I'm talking locker room talk here.
Yeah.
Like this is like, no. I look at an example like.
So let me ask you this, because I think this might put a pin in this grenade. As you describe the potential of this evilness, why aren't there more people doing it?
Maybe they are, and we just don't know. You can make an argument that
maybe they are, but we just don't. I think we're smart enough to see it. I think those people get discovered eventually. So
I would say okay. Well,
just answer the question: why aren't there more people doing it then?
Well, I think a lot of people are, and we just don't know. We don't see under the hood. I look at the Olympic Games, and I know there was a lot of athletes that failed doping tests before it, and just observing it now, I look and go, well. There will be dopers there that we just don't know about. An example would be
But I think we course correct. See, yes, I think there are some individuals that will play the game differently. And then I think we as a community can course correct. So I think what happens is at some point, human beings, again, we're the only species to make it to the moon. And one of the ways that we did that was through a sense of collaboration. Going back to the concept of honoring competition, if the other team decides not to show up, then we don't have a game to play.
Yeah.
So, there's been some controversial stuff going on in the Olympics right now where some athletes have refused to. There's a boxing situation, right, where there's an athlete that people are questioning, and some athletes are saying, I don't want to compete with this person. So at some point, I do think we as a community can hold each other responsible. So I go back to the concept, which is you're saying, and this is a fun theoretical conversation, you're saying, hey, theoretically, human beings are capable of this. And I'm going, but isn't it kind of cool that they don't? And you're going, oh, but some do. And I go, well, I think some push the threshold, but once they cross a line, society or the community says, hey, man, we're not good with this. And we just we're going to pick up our ball and go home.
It's fun. So an example happened with the Australian cricket team.
Okay.
They were playing a test series, I believe, against South Africa, sorry, right? Big rivalry between these two cricket nations. And it's what now is known as Sandpaper Gate, where they snuck in some sandpaper, roughed the ball up to help it swing ball in order to try and win the match. Now, I get and...
Sorry about that, Charlie.
I get and totally understand how that happened. You could be in a dressing room, in the locker room, just being like, fuck these, right? These guys have given us shit, right? You know what? Fucking, we're just going to do this, right? We're on. And the public backlash was incredible. People stripped of captaincies. And I was, look, yes, you've cheated, but then there was an understanding of how sports, you asked about what sports are from this tribal point of view before war. I say this quite often. Rugby league is a made-up game with made-up rules.
There it is.
And it makes us do some crazy things. Cricket is a made-up game with made-up rules. Australia, South Africa, they're made-up countries to an extent. It's where you belong. You're going into this game that really, from like, it means nothing, but it means everything.
But
and it's just funny how, that teams are willing to push the envelope. But you've proved that point, right? The public backlash was incredible and probably justified as well. But that said, how many other teams throughout the years have done this, applied this tactic of ball tampering?
Right, but it's not just the public backlash. What I'm saying is, to your point, there are rules that we write in a book. And then we all pass out the books and we say, okay, read the rules, you know the rules, I know. But then there's rules that we don't write in books that we all agree to. And so some of it is like, we'll tolerate, X, Y, and Z.
We'll tolerate someone being offside by half a meter.
Right. Or again...
But not by 1.5.
Or the speed limit's 100 kilometers per hour, but everybody's going 105. So it's like, okay, we're okay. So fundamentally, in order to be a society, whether it's in sport or larger, we have to agree to some commonality. And that's where I go, to your point, people are capable of violating, but isn't it nice that most don't? And when someone does cross a threshold, isn't it nice that we course correct? So I think what prevents the capability of actually being executed is the fact that we don't want to deteriorate or devolve. We do want to honor the Olympics, and we want to be honorable in the Olympics or the sport. Again, honor competition, I think, is a really beautiful concept that says, all right, if you're going to doctor the ball, I can accept that and still compete against you. But if you doctor it in a way that's a little bit over the threshold, right? Because like the same people who have the paper, I'm sure, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm just kind of waxing poetic with you. I'm sure they would do some things like maybe scruff it in the dirt a little bit. Yeah, like there's things that we can do that are a little bit cheeky, but we kind of all accept it. Like in North America, well, Australia too, right? Like you can go to any park and see a game of pickup basketball without a referee. They're just calling their own fouls.
Yeah.
And if someone fouls hard and you go, hey, dude, that's a foul. They go, but I barely touched you. You're like, all right, I'm not playing at this park anymore. It's too rough. And then same thing if you go the other direction, right? Like you're in a game of pickup basketball and you barely tap them and they go, foul, foul. And you're like, dude, I barely tapped you. You're not going to go to that park either. So I think what keeps us all in check, including those with the most sociopathic tendency, is there is a threshold that says, I'm not going. We're all in the game of life playing a game of pickup basketball, calling our own fouls. There's no ref. So it works because we want it to work. And that's kind of nice.
Yeah. We spoke a lot about the pursuit.
We spoke a lot about everything. Jeez,
pursuit of winning.
My brain hurts. Yeah.
The pursuit of winning, shaping environments to win. How'd you deal with defeat?
Ugh. Me personally, not well. But one of the things that I'll dialogue with folks is, again, a win without suffering is a triumph without glory. Like if you just want to win, compete against an inferior opponent, right? Like if you're a 20-year-old grown man and you want to win a 100-meter race, run against someone who's 8 years old. I really like your odds, kind of thing. But you'll realize that there's no merit or value to that win. And that goes back to the cheating stuff, but I'm glad that we're transitioning away because, man, that was intense. But like, I think what I encourage people is not to embrace losing because that sucks, but to accept that we would never fully understand the value of winning without the presence or risk of the pain of losing. So there's like an old phrase, one does not know pleasure without experiencing pain. If we were on a team that was undefeated in perpetuity forever, we would just calibrate to that, like jumping in a cold pool and then just getting used to that. Like the temperature of the water didn't change. We just got used to it. So we would get used to the winning in such a way that it just wouldn't feel good. So I think what kind of sucks, but is part of reality, is we have to experience the yin and the yang to really appreciate both ends of that spectrum.
Is there a process that changes after or part of the review process that changes after a loss, or would you want the review system to be consistent, win or lose?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's another one of those great quotes where they said something like, losing's the ultimate teacher, right? Like when you win, you have no idea kind of stuff. So do you want the process to be universal? When you win, do you do a debrief? And when
There's
you lose,
a saying here, winners have parties, losers have meetings.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
I've heard something similar. That's a good question. I got to digest that one for a sec. I think it's important to understand causation, but the pursuit of a one-to-one causation is important. If we knew what caused winning, we would all do that. And if we knew what caused losing, we would definitely stop doing that. There are certain parts of human behavior that are not meant to be mastered. The stock market, preventing murders, and winning. Like those are all things. Like I would love to figure out the stock market, which is based off of human behavior and human decision. I'd love to I'd be a billionaire. I'd love to prevent murders and sexual assaults. Like that would be amazing to do that for human beings. And I would love to help teams win every game they ever played.
It would be boring though, wouldn't it? That's the art of sport. That's the art of competition, right?
Well, I think that's the art of humanity. I mean, this is what's fun about being human, is we are capable of infallibility. We are fallible. Sorry, not capable of infallibility. We are fallible. Just to correct myself, like, it's neat to watch what we do. And I think that's also why we admire the athletes that put so much of their life force, time, energy, effort, commitment, sacrifice, all, like, some would argue, like, elite performers are in some ways the best versions of ourselves because we get to see what they've done. But I find, for me personally, I am most fascinated by both spectrums, like the elite performer and the resilient sufferer. Like, there's a lot of single parents out there that are working multiple jobs to make sure that their kids are fed and clothed. Like, there's an amazing aspect to that form of life too. So I guess, just waxing poetic, human beings are pretty friggin' cool. And to be able to join them on this mud ball that we call planet Earth is kind of fun. I mean, one of the luxuries that the AIQ has provided me is the ability to go to Australia and talk to people who literally are standing upside down from when I stand normally. Like, that blows my mind that, I'm standing here and you're standing here, and yet we can come together and have this kind of conversation where we're identifying universal truths, even though our experiences on this planet are so different. And then you go to, like, Europe and Asia. It's amazing to see the commonalities of us all.
Just on dealing with defeat, there's an example here in the NRL of a team that had gone back to back in terms of championships. They were aiming for their third. They came up against the Brisbane Broncos. The Brisbane Broncos, just quickly to wrap up last year's grand final, they had this game won. The dynasty of the Penrith Panthers was as good as over. Miraculously, the Penrith Panthers clawed their way back in the final moments of the game and won the game. It was the biggest lead ever surrendered in a grand final here in Australia. This team in Brisbane were full of superstars. They had this game won. A couple of those players were moving on. They lost. And most people thought that this year would be their year. They've lost that one. They know what it takes to get there, and they've capitulated. Now I think they are carrying their psychological scars from that grand final victory. From that grand final loss. Now, we lose in different ways. I've been part of grand final losses before, but never to such an extent like that. If you were working with that group and we're talking about dealing with defeat, how would you navigate this? Because I think that those players in that club do need professional help. It's like a grieving process. It's something that would never go away. It would stay with you. You've had all those sacrifices, all the things you've spoke about there that go into performance from the age of 7, 8 years of age. You've got to this North Star, both individually and collectively. And you didn't lose it. You won it and then you lost it. How would you navigate that in the off season, coming back together as a group? All
right. So that's a really sophisticated question. Another one. You are throwing fastballs, to use a North American phrase. I mean, this interview's got 98-mile-per-hour heat coming right down the pipe hole.
For 2 hours.
Yeah, no, let's go. Like, take that, Eddie Jones. What was the other one that you said was a memorable interview? We're going
Todd
after
Carney.
Yeah, I'm trying to get your top 5 list, if I can break that code. We'll see. I want to give credit where credit's due. There is a gentleman named Hap Davis. His real name's Henry Davis IV, but everybody calls him Hap. Hap is a brilliant mind, and he's done a whole bunch of research on the neurological impact of trauma. His real area of impact was with refugees who have gone through horrendous experiences. And then he kind of mutated in the world of sport. He's from Canada. He's in Canada. And he's worked with the U.S. Olympics, the Canadian Olympic teams, and worked with some NHL teams in hockey and stuff like that. Hap's real brilliant contribution to this is he talked about trauma and trauma reactions. So when you talk about like refugees who are, in prison camps and like miserable kind of stuff, that's more of like a capital T trauma. But when he talks about like somebody who's missed a game-winning shot, or the person who committed the fumble on the 1 yard line, or those kinds of things, he goes, there is a trauma reaction, like a lowercase t trauma. And his literature and his research, he discovered that there's actually similarities in the reaction. So I want to be perfectly clear first, and Hap isn't saying, it's not to say that losing a game and surviving a war are anywhere near equivalents. I mean, like, look, you lose a game and you lose a war, like people, like, you're the people in your unit that don't come home is different than, oh, we just lost a game. We all get to go home when we lose a game. So I want to make sure that we're clear of that distinction, right?
It is different, but it can still feel like a 10 out of 10.
And that's...
And you're how you can feel from losing a game of sport, that's the worst you've ever felt. Mm-hmm. And obviously losing a war, that's the worst you've ever felt.
And you talk to most military folks, and they'll tell you how much they think about that moment. Yeah. And they'll tell you about some of the traumatic elements, like, oh, this person was lying on my lap kind of thing. Mm. And when you talk to athletes who have been through that kind of horrendous experience, not war, but of losing, they will tell you, oh, and then there was this moment. So one of the phrases that when I'm waxing, when I'm in a conversation, like at a cocktail party with people who are not in the world of sports, and we talk about this, I'm like, oh, come on, it's different. It's not a war. I go, and this is, I think, the point you were making. Your worst day is your worst day.
Yeah.
And if your worst day is tearing an ACL, that's bad. If your worst day is a hangnail that got kind of ripped out, if that's your worst day, that's your worst day. So to your point, and I'm always respectful, like I don't know the Broncos personally. I've never worked with them. So when you go, hey, I think they need help, you might be right. I just don't know. So I think what happens a lot in the media is you'll ask a guy like me, hey, what do you think about Michael Jordan? Or what do you think about, fill in the name of the athlete of the team? And I just always like to start with, I don't know. And if I did know, I wouldn't talk about it, not publicly. Like these are still people's sons. These are still people's brothers. These are still people's friends. Like, they are human beings. I know they get paid a lot of money to be depersonalized. And I do think there is a relationship with social media and everything else where there is a huge depersonalization. I'm sure you felt that in your own life. It doesn't justify it. I get that that's part of it. And so I want to respect their humanity and their experience. So inside the building, they might be better off than we think. But let's just make this an intellectual exercise and suppose that they could benefit. And the scar tissue that you're describing, not physical, but emotional scar tissue, exists. I would lean into Hap Davis's literature regarding trauma reactions. And there's two scientists, brilliant minds, Edna Foe and Patty Resick. And one of the things that they talk about is the ability to retell a story without reliving it can be really powerful and impactful. So what Hap Davis noticed in his research was if you missed a game-winning shot, you would see a physiological reaction to that arena. So player X misses game-winning shot in arena. Every time they go and play in that arena, there is an element to it. And there's literature that kind of supports that. Like, certain players just have never won in this particular event or this environment, this stadium. when I was practicing as a psychologist in New York City, it happened to be during 9/11, which is a horrific, again, incomparable to losing, but your worst day is your worst day. Leaning on Edna Foa and Patty Resick's literature about treating trauma reaction, the ability to tell a story without reliving it, is about sitting with people who are impacted by the moment, and you just say, tell me about the moment. You just have them tell the story. You have them tell the story over and over and over again until they stop having the physiological reaction to it. And the physiological reaction can be as simple as like a heart beating fast, or them kind of fidgeting in their seat, or them going, I don't want to talk about it, or but you just go, okay, let's just talk about it. While they are retelling the story, you're mindful about some of the self-talk that can be engaged. So if they start to do things that are guilt or depression or even anxiety, that's like, hey, this could happen again. You kind of course correct that. Because like, for example, like anger, people talk about the cathartic process of, oh, I just got to let it out. The reality is like anger actually kind of feeds on itself. So if someone gets angry, whether it's anger towards others or anger towards self, which can be heavily reinforced in sport, right? Like we're avoiding the discomfort of anger, which is what, like, I'm so hard on myself. I just got to go out there and fix it and perform well. So when they start to elicit some emotional content in the retelling of the story, I try to course correct them back to just the storytelling of it. And what I have found to be impactful with the people that I've worked with that have been in those kinds of championship moments and faltered is they get to a place where they go, hey, I don't really feel a need to talk about it. I'm ready to put it to rest, put it to peace. Now, one-on-one individual, different than working with a collective. But at some point, an organization, whether it's, the Buffalo Bills missing a game-winning field goal in Super Bowl 25, I think it was, or you've got more recently the Atlanta Falcons who are up 28-3 against the New England Patriots, a lot like I know some of the individuals who were in those games, and we've talked about what that impact was, and doing it in a one-on-one, retelling the story without reliving it, I think had its impact and its efficacy. As an organization, it's the same kind of concept of how do you go about getting everyone collectively to kind of turn the page? And part of that is it's not so much a reset as much as an acceptance that this is a part of our history. It can't be undone. And we do have these scar tissues. So, again, to use a physical, I did have the misfortune of tearing my ACL, and I have lost some of my mobility because of it. Doesn't mean I can't still play soccer. I just can't play it the way I could pre-injury. And some of it is helping an organization go into the next competition with the acknowledgement and acceptance of, we might think about this a little bit, and that's okay. And kind of like Stephen Hayes' acceptance and commitment therapy, we can have thoughts and choose not to hold on to them. We can let them come and go.
So to implement that, basically what you're saying, they need to just keep talking about it until it doesn't invoke an emotional response.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't just go, okay, we're going to sit in a room and review this game together, and it would make people feel uncomfortable. You've got to do that until there is no feeling of uncomfort. It's an acceptance, and you accept that by keep reliving it, keep watching it back, and then it's kind of lost its effect now.
Well, and here's the other part, especially with situations that are highly public.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it. The world does it for you. So it's like, hey, I'll turn on TV and there's the game being replayed. Or, oh, hey, here's one. I'll go have dinner with my wife and some waiter will think to bring it up. Oh, man, sorry about the game, Oi, that was a bad one kind of thing. It's like, hey, thanks. So I think what's interesting is we on the outside will sometimes go, oh man, they must really be suffering. And those on the inside actually go, I get reminded about that incident about every day of the week. There is a famous baseball player, Buckner.
I've seen the Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. Didn't know anything about the event, but I know him because of Curb.
And you know what was great? Because I'm so glad that you went to the Curb episode. And Larry David, what a genius. He is fascinated by talking to Buckner like, you don't think... And remember, like, as the two of them are walking and people are like, you suck, Buckner. And he's like... And Larry's like, that doesn't bother me. He goes, dude, I'm kind of like numb to it now.
Yeah.
And so I do think people can get to a place not where it's been undone. It's just, this is a part of my history, but I can move forward. And I think what happens sometimes is you can also use it to your advantage of no one knows this experience, but those of us that were participants in it. So you can do kind of like an us versus them cohesion.
Yeah.
You can turn it into a positive. We can't undo that, but what we can do is we can rally around each other and support one another and go back to fighting again.
I like that. Go back to fighting. You brought up social media.
Yeah. A sword that cuts both ways, right?
There's pros and cons. Mm-hmm. There's no going back. I don't know what it's like in America, but over here, if a player is ever underperforming, involved in maybe off-field issues or on-field issues, they immediately turn it off. So what that says to me is they want to be on social media to get all the praise, but as soon as people start criticizing them, they turn it off. How do you advise your athletes to navigate the world of social media?
All right, so let's go back to some research. They did an interesting study with children where they gave them 5 minutes to solve a puzzle that really took 20 minutes to solve. And they gave one group, they said, if you work on this for 5 minutes, we'll give you $10. And they gave the second group a similar instruction. You can work on it for 5 minutes, just do the best you can. No money. $5 came and went. 5 minutes came and went. And the group, they said, okay, it's 5 minutes. Here's your $10. Would you like to continue to work on it? And they said, no, I'm good. I got my $10. The other group, they said, hey, 5 minutes is up. Do you want to continue working on it? They said, yeah. So what's interesting and what I pull from that study is that internal motivation that caused us all to join sports is there. But as we get really good, the intrinsic, that internal fire can sometimes be transferred to extrinsic motivators. So, I was a pretty good athlete in high school. Not a very attractive man, but I think I did well with my dating because of what I could do on the field. That's like getting $5 for doing a puzzle kind of thing, or $10 for the puzzle, right? And so that kind of stuff is less obvious to us. It's a slow creep. It's a slow build. So as Lady Gaga says, it's like I did it for the applause. And so I think there's an element to social media, and this is why I say it's a knife or a sword that cuts both ways, is never before has a fan base and the athletes had a direct line of communication with this kind of level of depth and access and ease. I mean, there was the fans that kind of like camp out at the hotel for like that brief time, but like this, you can give them your 140 character message however you want. And it can be praise or it can be insult. And so it becomes an interesting thing because I think those that follow and those that want to listen and engage with their fan base, what a wonderful way to connect. But if it's replacing an intrinsic motivation to participate in sport, that you're doing it for the love and acceptance of millions of strangers, which can be a pretty powerful motivator, you know as much as anyone. So I don't mean to like mansplain to you, it becomes a mechanism. So that's why I always, when I'm talking to athletes about social media, what I try to really emphasize is it's a sword that cuts both ways. And like a sword, you can use it however you choose to use it. But you should recognize what it is. And you should also recognize what it is not. It is not a loved one. It is not a parent. It is not a sibling. It is not a partner. It is not a teammate. And where they're coming from, the fan, and what message they're trying to send to you also comes from a level of complexity. Again, human beings are complicated, and human interaction's a multiplier of it.
It's fascinating that people, I guess, take that criticism of a person they don't ask the opinion of. So, yeah, if I'm an athlete, I care about what my coach says, my teammates say. It's not that I don't care about what the fans say, but I don't go for them for advice on critiquing my performance. I'm not going to stop a person in the street or after the game, but hey, mate, can you just give me some pointers on my game?
Right. That's funny, right? Like, hey, just real quick, can you just help me with my jump shot?
Yeah, like, what? Can you explain to me what I'm doing wrong and how I can get better? You wouldn't do that. But you
so let's go down this road.
Those comments can be arguably more impactful and have an effect, a negative effect on the athlete post game.
Do you know what the number one fear of human beings is?
Oh, you're going to remind me, and I'm going to say, oh yeah, of course I did know that.
Snakes. Snakes is the number one thing that number one phobia is snakes, which is crazy because more people die from cars than they do by snakes.
Yeah.
But there's a theory, and there's some evidence to support this. There's a new theory that's kind of drumming up, and I think there's some evidence to support it that says our trauma reactions can sometimes be hardwired in our DNA. So one of the reasons why snakes is the number one phobia has a lot to do with the fact that people throughout history have survived snake bites. Way more, we've survived historically more snake bites than we have car accidents. You just got to go back a few thousand years. I bring it up because you know what the number two phobia is? Fear of public speaking, rejection. Going back to Zog and Cave Nuck and his ability to throw a rock as far as he hit. For those that are still watching or listening to this podcast, that's called a throwback because I don't know what hour we're on here. But if you were to survive back in the day, it was really done as a collective. There's safety in numbers kind of thing, right? So being kicked out of one's tribe would be almost certain death. Again, thousands of millions of years ago. So if this theory about our DNA hardwiring based off of survival mechanisms and trauma hardwiring our DNA, and snakes is number one and rejection is number two, social media has its impact because I don't think anyone truly loves feeling rejected. So it's not that they're asking for the advice, but they are asking for the acceptance and inclusion, which is what we are as a tribe and what we as human beings seek.
Great answer.
Mic drop.
Great answer.
Finally got one. It took us a few hours, but I finally got one that might have resonated. Woo, we did it.
Oh, it's a great way of looking at it and understand. But I guess it's okay to know that, but have an athlete understand that and still not be affected must be a pretty big task.
It is, but I think kind of like, you know, once you know, that takes a lot of the venom out of it, right? We go, so this is why I'm having an emotional reaction to what I'm experiencing right now. I can understand that intellectually now. And I think it kind of it goes from an intellectual grasp to then a more like emotional or gut grasp. We're like, okay, I get it now. And the other thing too is when the emotional pings, again, going back to the Broncos or the social media, is like, oh, I'm feeling this sensation. It's funny, like athletes tend to talk about emotions more as a sensation. Like, oh, I feel like, they don't say I'm anxious. They'll say, oh, my gut, yeah, I got butterflies. So you go, I'm feeling this sensation, and now I know why this sensation is being activated within me. I can choose to accept it and deal with it, or I can just choose to accept it and ignore it and let it go, let it just kind of dance around, and then I can kind of return to my task.
Yeah. The AIQ.
Yeah.
You and the team developed this system. What are your aims?
Well, it's funny that you say that because we originally named the company Athletic Intelligence Measures, AIM, and then we realized that AIM and AIQ were so close it confused people. So now we just talk AIQ. But what are our aims? Our aims are to help. Our aims are to help teams be more well-informed, so that way they can generate the right kind of environment around the person so they get that optimal production. What I like to explain to coaches and front office folks is whether you are aware of it or not, their cognitive profile exists. Their level of intelligence to process and understand the game, it exists. It's no different than like having a couch in your living room. Whether the lights are on or off, the couch is there. Prior to the AIQ, there was no measurement or understanding of how people process the game. So, you know the old adage, they either don't know or they don't care? Most coaches in front office, they default to, this guy doesn't care. And I'm going, no, it might be that they have something that's the equivalent of a learning disability. So an intelligent profile, or an aspect of the comprehensive profile of intelligence, it exists within the player, whether we measure it or not. The fact that we measure it is half the challenge. So we've got it. And then it's like, well, now what do we do? And so what's really cool is, again, my partner Jim and I, is not only do we help identify cognitive strengths, let's lean on these, and cognitive deficits, hey, let's find strategies to solve these. So what we do in our reports and in our consultation is we talk to coaches where we go, you know, like we had a meeting earlier today with a really dynamic rugby league team, NRL team, and we were talking about one of their young players, and we said, like, here's some things you can do. He was a halfback, and they're like, here's some things you can do. Like, his spatial awareness was superior. And so spatial awareness is really about knowing where you are in relation to space. So if you think about like a halfback who's got to have a 360-degree responsibility, what we said was, this guy kind of knows where he is out on the pitch. He knows where he is. And if he rotates and turns around, he can quickly calibrate and orient to where he is in relation to everybody else. This should help him make faster decisions and could help him be that leader on your team that helps make people around him better. So I think our aim is helping people be more well-informed so they can make more well-educated decisions that ultimately lead to optimal performance, because I've never met a coach who really loves mother effing a player, and I've never met a player who really loves to get mother effed. But the conflict often comes from some form of misunderstanding. And we can look at a player and go, he's not tall enough, or he's not fast enough. But we've never up until this point looked at a player and gone, does he see the game, or does he almost have like as if he's looking at the game with one eye? And what we've done through, and it took us 15 years to develop this. We wanted to make sure, because you can't visually see, you can't visually see intelligence. So it took us 15 years where we really did a lot of research and development. We followed the American Psychological Association's ethical guidelines for test construction, because we wanted to make sure that we were capturing the fidelity and the accuracy. Like, we're trying to do 4K television type quality, like QLED type quality of understanding how these players see the game and process the game. So, I think the thing that's been very rewarding and enriching personally is all the different opportunities and experiences that we've gotten to do, like come to Australia. But even more than that is I've had players that have said, like, I didn't know why I was doing this, and now I do. And I've had coaches that go, man, I can't figure out what to do with this player, and now I do. There was a Major League Baseball team where the coach told us that we prolonged a player's career by 7 years.
Yeah, wow.
And it almost brought me to tears. Like, I was like, God, that's what we did this for, was like, isn't it great that, because what happened was they couldn't get this player unstuck, and then we AIQ'd him, and we gave them like 2 or 3 coaching tips, and they implemented them. They're like, it did it. Like, that's what did it. We unlocked it, kind of thing. It's a puzzle. Like, the way we did it was we said, first we got to define sport. Sport is an ever-evolving level of constantly mutating, chaotic, unsolvable puzzle. And then we said, what are the cognitive abilities to do that and navigate that space? So whether you're a firefighter who kicks a door down and has to scan looking for people to save and fires to put out, or you're a halfback who's scanning the field and looking for a teammate to pass the ball to, or finding a running lane to get to the end zone, or, you know, to score, that was the mechanism. And it took us a long time. And, you know, again, couldn't have had a better teammate and partner in Jim Bowman, who said, hey, like, let's do this. This will be fun. And let's try to figure out what cognitive abilities are most needed. And then let's figure out the best ways we can to measure them. And then let's figure out what we can tell people what to do with it.
Could this be used in the corporate world as well? Or have you ever used it in the corporate world? Because, you know, there's a lot of similarities between high-performing teams with sports and in big business as well. Have you looked at that at all? Yeah,
we have. And we've actually had some that have approached us, and we've kind of deterred it, but we're open to it.
But why did you deter it?
Because I think that there's other cognitive abilities that we do not measure that would be really valuable in corporate space. So if we were to create I don't know, like, this would be one I'd have to take back to Jim, and he'd probably want to punch me in the face and be like, hey, you want to do like a corporate version of this? And maybe. But so I think the idea is, what we have is the AIQ in sport, in military, in first responders. Like, we've got a really good cognitive profile. Like, there's nothing, there's 15 points of data. There's nothing that we're missing that when you watch an athlete perform, there's not a cognitive ability that we're not capturing. If we were to go in the corporate space, some of what we capture would definitely be applicable, but there's some other things that we would probably want to add just to make sure that that's also comprehensive. Because if we're trying to solve the puzzle, not why does someone do it, that's their passion, that's their purpose. We're trying to solve the puzzle of how do they do it.
Yeah.
And if you don't capture that completely, you'll miss out on some aspect of that how. And then you'll be wrong. And we just don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, fair play. We have a couple of questions that we have for each and every guest. A couple are NRL specific, so I'm not going to ask you to name your dream spine.
You know, or please don't ask me what a hooker is, because that could get us in a really bad situation.
It sure could. The most interesting person you've met on your journey?
My journey in Australia or my journey in life?
Journey in life.
Most interesting? Oh, gosh. I have been very blessed to be around some amazing players, coaches, supports. I mean, like, some of the best of the best of the best. And I could listen to them read the phone book and everything else. I mean, those conversations, like, I mean, you know, just, you know, working for the Golden State Warriors, for example, sometimes, like, we'll bring in like an astronaut, and then you're sitting there watching Coach Kerr talk to an astronaut. And you're like, this is insane. Like, what an amazing, like, fly on the wall moment. But the most fascinating person, I would say, are my 2 children. Like, Dylan and Tyler, they're pretty neat watching them navigate the world and the things that they do in the world. So I think if you were to ask, like, who am I most fascinated by, it would be those 2 are just fun to talk to. So I'd put my kids as 1A and 1A.
You can't split them.
Yeah, listen, I don't even know if they're going to watch this or listen to this, but no, come on. I mean, No,
everyone's got a favorite child.
That's what they tell me, but I like mine.
It just changes.
Yeah. I love mine for very different reasons. They're fun to be around.
Just finally, a sliding doors moment that you think about the alternative happening. So one for me would be the decision to come to Australia. Sometimes think, oh well, what would life have been like if it had stayed in England? Oh
God. I have a few sliding door moments. One is such a long-winded story. We've already gone. You want the long-winded one or the short-winded one?
Whichever.
Shit, I was hoping you would pick.
Let's go short-winded because we've been going, 2.5 hours? So it's been great, by the way. So.
Thank you. I was consulting for the Miami Dolphins when I got a phone call from one of their rivals, the Buffalo Bills, and their new head coach, Sean McDermott. And Sean McDermott, I don't know how he got my name, but he called me and was like, hey, I hear you're the guy, and we're building this thing in Buffalo. I'd like you to join us. Now, the Miami Dolphins had just just made it to the playoffs. They were on the upswing. We had a rookie quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, was doing really good. Like, everything looked really good on paper. And the Buffalo Bills at the time were really struggling. However, my whole family's from Buffalo. My grandfather used to work for the team. I grew up a Bills fan. So to have Coach McDermott, he called me and was like, hey, this is Coach McDermott, and wondering if you want to come aboard. And it's funny because he's like, hey, he goes, I'm Sean McDermott. I'm the new head coach for the Buffalo Bills. I'm like, yeah, I know, kind of thing, right? So I had a moment where I could have gone to Buffalo. Instead, I remained loyal to the Miami Dolphins. The Bills ended up drafting a quarterback by the name of Josh Allen, and they've been just absolutely crushing it since. The Miami Dolphins, we did not have the kind of outcome that we were hoping for. So I'd say that's one sliding moment that I think about from time to time. I'm like, I wonder if I had joined the Bills, what I'd be doing right now, kind of ththing.
You'd be cold.
Well,
you'd be freezing.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be looking at palm trees.
Well, that's the complexity of life, right? Like, you gain this, you lose that, you lose this, you gain this. But the other thing too is the head coach at the time, Adam Gase, for the Miami Dolphins, the GM, Chris Greer, and the president, Mike Tannenbaum. So they found out about the Bills' interest, and they flew me down, and they were like, hey, you were allowed to cuss. I noticed you.
Oh, yeah.
So the head coach goes, just so you know, we're motherfucking blocking you from the Buffalo Bills. And I was like, how'd you know that? And he goes, we know everything. And then I was like, okay, fine. And then the three of them were like, why do you want to do this? And I said, well, my family and everything in Buffalo. And they're like, and this was kind of cool on their part. They go, if you want to be a fan, you can go join them. But we're doing something really cool here. And this is what sold me, actually, was the head coach said, Adam Gase, who really unbelievable human being, good person. He goes, Goldman, stick around. Like, let's do some really cool shit that no one's ever done before, and let's fuck shit up. And I was like, you know what? I'm in, dude. Like, count me. So, like, again, I asked you about your personal, like, my personal mission statements. I just want to do cool shit with cool people. And it seems like every time I've made a decision where I go, these are some cool people and this is some cool shit, it's been a really neat experience. And so I bought into that. So it's funny because the sliding door movie and all of that, like, it becomes an interesting moment of introspection where you go, what if I could go back in time and kind of tell myself, like, hey, the Bills are about to draft Josh Allen. You're going to really go on a neat roller coaster for a while. I might still say, hey, just so you're prepared, the Bills are going to draft Josh Allen and you might want to trade up or something. But these people in Miami, Tannenbaum, Greer, and Gase, they really believe in you and they believe in what we're doing. And it's not going to be long, but it's going to be pretty neat. I think I might still make the same choice anyways because it's cool shit with cool people. We just didn't we ran out of runway.
I like that North Star.
Yeah.
Do cool shit with cool people. It's a very fortunate position to be
here.
in.
Yeah.
I feel like I hope I've contributed to that.
Oh, you've definitely been cool. You're definitely cool, dude. And this has been a very cool shit conversation.
It sure has. And just from my notes, we've barely covered half of the areas I would like to have covered, but it's been a fantastic conversation. I understand, well, we're both busy people. I've got another podcast to record after this, and you've got Sydney to see and do. Just want to say thank you for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation, and wish you all the very best with the AIQ and all the sporting organizations that you're a part of. I'm sure they'll be very successful.
This has been an absolute gift. So I want to thank you. And if you ever want to do a part 2, let me know. We'll get to the other half of your questions. Hopefully your fans have not fallen asleep by now. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
appreciate you.